The following podcast contains bizarre theories, strange facts, and some out-of-this-world opinions. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you trust the government. It's 1971, Rhode Island. A family of 7 moves into a crumbling colonial farmhouse. They're looking for a fresh start, but what they find is the opposite. Soon after moving in, their clocks all stop at exactly 3:07 a.m. They wake up to the stench of rotting meat, the bed shake, and one night the mother looks in the mirror and sees a woman hanging from the ceiling, smiling at her. This house didn't just have ghosts, it had a queue of them. Then, a psychic investigator and her husband, who claim they're the only ones who can save the family, show up. Their names, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The world's most famous, and maybe most controversial, paranormal double act. This isn't just a film, this is the case that birthed a franchise. But the real nightmare, it might not be the ghosts, it might be what the church and Hollywood didn't want us to know. Welcome to Conspiracy. Hello and welcome back to Conspiracy, the podcast where I dive headfirst into the weird, the wild, and the wonderful world of conspiracies. I'm Ash, your host of Conspiracy. Quick disclaimer, this is a comedy and entertainment podcast. I joke, I rant, I spiral into tangents, and it's probably not to be taken for gospel. You get the gist. Now, if you're new here, first of all, welcome to the club. And just a quick note before we get stuck in, if you do enjoy this madness, make sure you hit follow or subscribe wherever you listen. New episodes drop every single Wednesday, and following the show helps keep our little tinfoil community growing, and crucially, keeps us out of those shadow bans. Now, the next 2 weeks are going to be spooktacular, because in the spirit of Halloween, I'm bringing you 2 back-to-back supernatural cases that'll make you question every creak, shadow, and cold draft in your house. These are going to be mini-files episode formats, shorter, snappier, and straight to the spooky. This week we're diving into The Conjuring, the real-life haunting that terrified a family, baffled investigators, and inspired one of the biggest horror franchises of all time. The story you're about to hear isn't a Hollywood fiction, it's based on real testimonies, real investigators, and allegedly real demonic activity. We're talking clocks freezing at 3:07 a.m, whispers in the dark, and spirits that didn't just want to scare the Perron family, they wanted to own them. So, grab your holy water, keep your tinfoil hats close, and maybe don't listen to this one in the dark, because we're going to be walking the halls with the Perron family, look the devil in the eye, and figure out who actually was more terrifying, the witch or the people who claimed they were there to help. Let's dive in. Alright, let's crawl into this one, because the way this story starts is so classic American horror, it should be a trope. The year is 1971. We're in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The Perron family, Roger, Caroline, and their 5 daughters. I need to pause there. 5 daughters. That's already a recipe for chaos, haunted house or not. But they decided they need a change, so they buy this huge, crumbling colonial house. Now, this isn't just some modern bungalow. This place was called the Arnold Estate, and it was built in the 1730s. 200 plus years old, which in America terms is ancient. So if you're buying a house that's been around since before central heating, you got to know you're getting more than just drafty windows, let me tell you that. So you're getting a house that's essentially become a spiritual landfill at this point. And over the centuries, the house had seen 8 generations of one family live and die within its walls. So think about that. 8 generations of people coughing, arguing, having terrible Christmases, and then finally kicking the bucket. All those memories, all those vibes, they're not going to just clear out when you slap a fresh coat of paint on it. They're baked into the very masonry of the building. And the house itself was massive. 14 rooms, 2 stories, and it came with 200 acres of land. Roger Perron, the dad, thought he was getting a pastoral American dream bargain. And you can imagine the estate agent probably had just had like one eye twitching the whole time, just saying, "Yeah, it's a fixer-upper. Just ignore the overwhelming sense of dread. It's character. Think of the history." And the locals, the people who actually lived in the town and knew the score, well, they were the first red flag, to be honest. Because when the Perrons arrived, the first thing they were told was essentially, "Welcome to the neighbourhood, here's some fresh cookies just baked for you, but your house is definitely haunted. Just a heads up." But most of them are pretty harmless, so you'll be alright. And honestly, if I moved into a new neighbourhood and the first piece of advice is a ghost classification system, well, I'm back in that removal van before I've even put the kettle on. "Oh, don't worry, this is just a Class 2 poltergeist. He'll only throw your socks." It's the Class 4s you have to watch out for. They use the power tools. But, as you can probably guess, the Perrons stayed. And they quickly discovered they weren't just the tenants, they were the new targets for roughly 10 to 20 entities who had clearly been waiting centuries for someone new to annoy. So now we've got Roger and Caroline and their 5 daughters moved into the house, all set up, ready for the American dream, and weird stuff has already started to happen. So let's move on to the haunting and what actually took place in the house. So the haunting actually started subtly, which is a sign of patient haunting, I guess. Don't rush the terror. Just start with the mild, passive-aggressive behaviour. So it was just little things at first. I guess you can call them little, but, I mean, if it's the first time seeing them, then probably isn't that little. But, things like brooms flying up and landing back down in a neat pile. You'd feel a tug on your skirt. A stack of coins would randomly appear on the floor. Mischievous, low-grade poltergeist with the energy of a bored teenager is what it's giving. But the kids even made friends with one of the spirits, who they nicknamed Manny, who was a shy little boy who, bless him, was apparently the least terrifying housemate of all of them. He probably just wanted someone to play Kaplunk with, to be honest, but then it became sinister. Full spooky season, Halloween, Conjuring series, dark. So the absolute weirdest and most persistent detail is the 3:07 a.m. thing. Every clock in every single room, they all just froze at the exact moment. Now, if it's 1 clock, you blame the electricity board or the batteries or whatever power supply they were using. But if it's every clock in a massive 14-room house, you got a metaphysical time management problem. It's not just spooky at that point. This is kind of like precision haunting. We've had, what was the other one? Passive haunting, did I say? No, patient haunting. And now we're in this precision haunting. So it's definitely stepped up a notch. Because it suggests some type of intelligence. Or maybe a demon who's annoyingly good at being punctual. It's his shift, and he clocks in exactly on time. But apart from the 3:07 a.m. thing and all the clocks in the house stopping at that time, which is already pretty creepy, things started to get physical. The girls' bed started to violently shake, and they wake up feeling this intense Arctic cold presence right next to them. The daughter, Andrea, claims she felt a cold, thin hand grab her leg and pull her out of the bed. Which, is simply unacceptable behaviour. Even a ghost should know you don't tug on a person's leg at 3 a.m. without at least offering them a cup of tea. Just bad manners. And the smell. The smell is another thing that became very prominent in the house. Apparently, it was awful. It was like sudden, horrifying stench of rotting meat or putrefied flowers that would just appear and then vanish. I guess you could say it's the spiritual equivalent of leaving a bag of gone-off prawns behind the sofa for a decade. Imagine trying to host a dinner party and suddenly your kitchen smells like a bin lorry went up in flames. But the worst of the entities focused entirely on Carolyn Perron, the mother. This entity was later identified as Bathsheba Sherman, and she was a hater. A hating-ass how. Well, she hated Caroline specifically. Andrea Perron described her as absolutely hideous, with a neck broken to one side. Caroline herself was once checking the laundry and felt an immediate, blinding pain in her leg, only to look down and see a red welt forming, like a fresh bruise. So what I'm hearing is that the house, or this ghost, or Bathsheba, is actually trying to give Caroline a spiritual Chinese burn. So this entity wasn't trying to scare him, it was actually trying to replace the mother with herself. A much darker intent than just rattling a chain, let me tell you. So, with all of this going on in the house, what do? How do they solve this problem? They clearly, classic American horror, they probably put all of their money into this house, so they can't just get up and leave, so they need to sort the problem. So what do? The family were absolutely on their knees, right? They called the local priest, who basically did a very fast blessing, shrugged and went, yeah, it's a bit much for us, so maybe try a church farther away, I don't know. So they did what any family does when they run out of options. They call the people with the biggest media profile. So in 1973, in walks Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, the Warrens. They are the ultimate paranormal double act. They are fascinating. Ed, a self-taught demonologist, a job title that sounds like it should involve an MVQ and a very long waiting list, and Lorraine, a professional clairvoyant. They basically had the world's most terrifying CV. They arrived with their reputation for dealing with cases like Amityville, and they had a camera crew and a whole lot of holy gear. So they turn up basically like rock stars, ready to sell the tickets. They took one look at the house, or maybe just Lorraine did, and went, right, yeah, this isn't ghosts, this is demonic possession, and you've got a prime suspect. Lorraine claims she immediately saw a dark, hovering presence fixed entirely on Caroline. She identified the spirit as Bathsheba Sherman, and according to their version, Bathsheba was a local woman from the 1800s who was a Satan worshipper and baby killer. Allegedly, she was so dedicated to the dark side of the Force, that when her husband caught her, she climbed a giant cedar tree on the property, declared her eternal devotion to Satan, and hanged herself at 3:07 a.m. Look at that. There's the precision timekeeping again, even in the suicide. It's professional dedication to being evil. She committed suicide just to annoy the local clockmaker. The Warrens declared that Bathsheba was trying to possess Caroline to complete her unfinished business, which was, naturally, killing the kids. It's the ultimate she wants your life horror trope, but instead of the new girlfriend, it's a 200-year-old baby-killing, aggressively punctual witch. And the family, being absolutely terrified, just says to the Warrens, go on, do something, get rid of it. Whatever you need to do, go for it. So, fast forward some time, and the Warrens are now essentially living in the house, right? But Roger and Caroline are giving them one rule. Do not provoke the spirits. We're on thin ice, right? And if you tell a famous demon hunter to not provoke a demon, you know exactly what's coming next. It's like telling a toddler not to press the big red button. So what does Ed Warren do? He decides to perform an unauthorized exorcism on Carolyn Perron. Yeah. So not just a quiet prayer, a complete theatrical event. According to the daughters, Ed Warren held a seance in the living room and attempted to cast out the spirit. The mother Caroline began to thrash violently, so violently that she had to be restrained. She started speaking in strange, guttural voice that the children couldn't understand. It's the kind of voice you use when you're trying to, shift a heavy wardrobe and you're like, that was my attempt. Yeah. So kind of like that kind of voice, but it was coming out of their mom, and the rotten meat smell, it just intensified until it was completely unbearable. It was absolute chaotic cinema, right? The daughter, Andrea Perron, later said the sight was so traumatic that it was like watching their mother being torn apart. So can you imagine? You ask for help, and the help turns your mother into a demonic spectacle in front of 5 traumatized children. Roger Perron, the father, snapped. He felt the Warrens had just made the situation worse, and that they put his wife in immediate physical and psychological danger for the sake of their tapes. He immediately kicked them out of the house. He literally drove them away. He basically said, look mate, spirits are bad, but you two are much worse. So the Warrens left. But they did get what they came for. They had their tape recordings of the seance, their notes, and the core, terrifying story for what would become the biggest, most infamous case, and a story they'd sell for decades. The Perrons stayed for another 7 years after that, battling the spirits until they finally ran out of resources and moved out in 1980. They left the house, not because the haunting stopped, but because they couldn't afford to live in a perpetual state of psychological terror anymore. The house won. And that is the terrifying, un-Hollywood sanitized story of the Perron family. But of course, the Warrens telling the story is just the official narrative. We need to move on and look at the actual shadows. So now we've got the full story. The Perron family was terrorized for a decade, and the help they called in nearly sent their mother over the edge. So the official narrative, which is what you see in the film, is neat, tidy, and has a satisfying ending. But you and I know that anything that neat is usually a lie. So the conspiracy here isn't that the house wasn't haunted. The conspiracy is that it was so profoundly, undeniably haunted that the highest powers had to immediately start spinning the narrative to protect their own reputations. Okay? So let's start with the big boys. The church. So the Warrens constantly boasted that they were the best in the business. They were the unofficial avengers for fighting Satan, with a supposed direct line to the Vatican. When a case this high profile comes along, a literal demonic possession attempted on a mother corroborated by multiple family members, you'd think the Pope would be on the phone saying, right, get the full squad out there, bring the oil, and don't forget the receipt. But what actually happened was that the Vatican flat out refused to log the case as verified demonic activity. They dismissed it. It went into the church's ledger as unsubstantiated claims or mass hysteria. And that is where the conspiracy starts. Why? Because if the church publicly confirms that a random colonial farmhouse in Rhode Island is home to a baby-killing witch who can possess people, because if the church publicly claims, then they're omitting one terrifying thing. The power of Satan is not limited to their rulebook. They don't want people thinking, if ghosts are that powerful, maybe my local priest isn't enough. Maybe I need to call the celebrity demon hunters or just move house, right? It blows a hole right in their entire organizational structure. They would rather tell you that a stressed mother imagined 10 years of torture than admit that the devil is capable of signing an extended lease in the suburbs. And when you think about it, it's actually the ultimate turf war, isn't it? The Vatican versus the unruly ghost. And for the Vatican, the cover-up, the silence, the denial is always the cleanest option. So, the church's position is that it's not real. My position, conspiracy position, I think, is that it was too real, so they had to pretend it isn't. Because you don't suffer 10 years of psychological terror just because the clergy told you it was stress, right? Next up, we look at the modern spin doctors, Hollywood. So the film, The Conjuring, which came out in 2013, we've all seen, we all love it. It made an absolute fortune. And the Perron family was very open about it. They loved the publicity, but they felt the film took the truth, put it in a washing machine, and ironed out all of the inconvenient wrinkles. So the conspiracy here is that Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema cleaned up the truth to make it palatable for the mainstream, and crucially, to avoid legal action. So they changed the story, basically. They claimed the terror was inflicted primarily on the parents, not the 5 little girls, which is what the family actually reported. And the most damning detail for the Warrens, that the father, Roger, kicked them out for nearly killing the mother with an unauthorized, dangerous exorcism. So that was completely erased. Obviously, we've all seen the film. Instead, we got a big, heroic exorcism sequence with Patrick Wilson saves the day. It's the ultimate happy ending lie. So why would they do that? Because Hollywood deals in tropes, not facts. The truth that the heroic paranormal investigators actually made things worse and almost broke the family is bad for the brand, right? They had to protect the Warren legacy to keep the franchise running and get 7 films out of it. It's genius, really. So they sell you the terror, but they refuse to sell you the liability. They basically rewrote the Warrens' final act to make them look like heroes instead of reckless investigators who almost caused a literal domestic tragedy. So here's my question for you guys. If Hollywood is willing to lie about the heroes, what else are they lying about when they say based on a true story? Let me know in the comments what you think in terms of what other things Hollywood could be lying about when they say based on a true story. Now let's take a look about the specific entity that was in the house, right? The Bathsheba Sherman. Because this hits the core of the Warrens' method and their motivation. So the Warrens declared the demon was Bathsheba Sherman, a woman who supposedly lived in the house in the 1800s and was a satanic baby killer who hanged herself at 3:07 a.m. Classic. But here is the inconvenient truth. If you look at the local historical records, Bathsheba Sherman was a real person, but she was never charged with murder and she died as an old woman. The rumour of her being a satanic baby killer was local folklore that was already floating around the town like a creepy local urban legend. So, the conspiracy is this. The Warrens took local gossip and weaponized it to create a marketable villain. They needed a narrative that fit their "it's always a demonic possession" template, and they couldn't just say it could just be a nasty generic poltergeist that we can't really explain, but it's nothing too crazy, right? Because that doesn't sell tickets or books. Yeah, they sold loads of books. So they needed a name, a motive, and a tragic timed suicide. So it makes you think, how many other famous demons are just local women who were falsely accused of something 100 years ago, then had their reputation trashed by two people with a camera and a crucifix? It's actually the ultimate professional hustle. Rebrand a simple ghost story into a global demonic phenomenon. And they did it well. And they're still cashing in today. And let's move on to something that's maybe a bit more full tinfoil. So let's look at the occult government files. So we've established the ghost story is real and the conspiracy is the cover-up of that reality. But what if the cover-up wasn't just protect the church, but to also protect the Pentagon? So the Perron haunting was happening between 1971 and 1980. This is the exact window when the CIA's illegal MK Ultra project, the mind controlling and psychological warfare experiments, was in full swing. Now, we've done a whole episode on MK Ultra, so definitely go back and listen to that. I'm not really going to go into too much detail about it today, but part of this project was spending millions testing on psychic phenomena, remote viewing, and mind-to-mind influence. So the conspiracy here is, was the terror in the Perron farmhouse an unintentional psychological bleed over from occult government experiments? They were intentionally trying to induce psychic breaks and spiritual possession states in labs elsewhere. So think about the symptoms in the Perron house, the targeted psychological torture, the horrific smells, the feeling of being pulled. It does fit the profile of extreme sensory and psychological manipulation. And the Warrens, they pop up exactly when the activity reaches peak notoriety. Were they just two eccentric investigators, or were they shadow assets? Independent contractors used to study, record, and popularize these phenomena to keep the public focused on demons instead of the possibility of government psychic warfare. It is genius. If you can convince the world the chaos is caused by a ghost, no one will ever suspect it was the military messing with people's minds. So here's where I stand on it. The conspiracy take. I absolutely believe the Perrons were telling the truth. Something truly malevolent happened in that house for sure, and the conspiracy here is the global effort by the church, by Hollywood, and maybe by the government to reduce a terrifying, decade-long psychological reality into a neat, easily digestible film about a fictional demon. And I think the truth actually is far weirder, far more personal, and far more frightening than what we were told. Also, the fact that the Warrens were kicked out of the house, and it's not just kind of like they weren't the be-all, the end-all, and they sorted the problem. They just got removed by the Perrons, and the haunting continued for 10 more years after that. Like, it's quite interesting, and it's very different to what you're told in Hollywood, and the way that we are made to digest this type of stuff, because now when you think about demons and ghosts and things like that, you kind of do think of Hollywood now. You just forget that this stuff is genuinely real and terrifying. It's out there, and there's many segments of the Vatican and the church that do explore this and do work with this, and I think you can actually go and study to be a demonologist and perform exorcisms in the Vatican even today. So it's definitely a sector of life that most people can't see, but the way that we've been made to digest it by Hollywood has made it kind of accessible and kind of fun and kind of a joke. But yeah, alright, that's enough of the government files and Hollywood lies for now. Let's take a breath, because talking about a decade-long demonic haunting does tend to make you check over your shoulder a little bit. So I want to pivot for a minute and ask you, the listeners, what do you believe? Do you think the ghosts are real, or are they just residual energy from old wiring and bad plumbing? Have you ever had an experience that made you question everything you thought you knew? Because, to be honest with you, I come to this job with a healthy dose of skepticism. As always, you have to, or you'd never sleep. But listening to this story with the Conjuring and the Warrens and the Perron family, it does make you potentially believe that this type of stuff is real, right? So have you got any experiences like that? Or maybe something even crazier? If so, send them in to me at conspiracy@gmail.com or via DM on TikTok @conspiracy. I'd love to hear them. And speaking of weird experiences, stick around for next week's episode, because I'll be diving in and telling you all about a couple of incidents that happened to me personally that is tied directly into this type of story. It's very weird, it's very out there, so tune in next week for that. You don't want to miss it for sure. Right, okay, so that brings us to the end of this spectacular mini files about the Conjuring, the Warrens, the Perrons. We've gone deep into the Perron Family Haunting, the case that Hollywood took, bleached and sold back to us as a neat horror flick. We've discovered that the church had to deny the whole thing to protect the paperwork. We saw that Hollywood had to invent a happy ending to protect the Warrens' brand. And we figured out that Bathsheba Sherman was basically a victim of a PR campaign designed to give the paranormal world a decent villain. But here's where we stand. The Perrons lived a nightmare, the house was genuinely profoundly haunted, and the real conspiracy wasn't the ghost story, but the decade-long effort by everyone else to cover up the fact that the ghost story was true. So, do tell me what you believe. Was it a genuine, historic, demonic infestation? Was it the government using psychic warfare to mess with people's heads? Or was it just a really bad rental agreement? You know which side I'm leaning towards. And the fact that I'm not sleeping tonight, and neither should you. So if you've enjoyed this Halloween themed episode of Conspiracy, here's what you need to do. Hit follow or subscribe wherever you listen. New episodes drop every single Wednesday, and following the show helps us keep our little tinfoil community growing. Drop a 5-star review, it helps keep us in the charts and out of the shadow bans. And also send your maddest stories, your personal creepouts, your UFOs, your ghost encounters to conspiracy@gmail.com, or slide into the DMs on Instagram and TikTok if you're feeling cheeky, @conspiracy. And remember, we have another spooktacular mini file episode coming next Wednesday, where I'm going to be diving into another classic, maybe haunting, maybe ghost story. I won't tell too much. And I'll also be revealing a couple of my own genuinely freaky encounters. So until next time, keep your tinfoil hats polished, keep questioning everything, and remember, the truth is out there. Conspiracy.